In light of recent events, plenty of people are asking what the world might be like without police. Reform has been optioned for years with very little in terms of concrete outcomes. With this in mind, an unprecedented upswell of support for actions like defunding and abolishing police in America has materialized. Folks all over the place are wondering aloud about a policeless future. Resources are being shared, demands are being made. Police organizations across North America are under pressure to reduce their budgets and to reallocate those funds to less violent community projects. This is progress towards a stronger, more human future. However, if we here at LBQ were just to ask what if the police were abolished, we'd be asking a question that already has a lot of answers. So we'll take it a step further. Hello fellow friends and philosophers, and welcome back to the most mind-bending channel on YouTube, Life's Biggest Questions. I'm your voice in the void, Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to be asking the following question. What if the police never existed? Big history-altering stuff right here. Before we get going, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more history and mystery. Perfect, let's begin. Now, the police as we know them haven't been around for too long. As the modern, organized institution that roams the streets and fills our prisons, police are only a few hundred years old. However, the idea of policing goes way, way back. All societies need rules to function and thrive. Sorry, anarchists, even you need some semblance of order to totally ignore. The world doesn't just work the way any individual wants it to. A lot of early societies relied on communities to set and enforce their own rules. People would shun those who didn't exist within the status quo, which was largely effective, especially in smaller groups. If you know everyone and everyone is telling you not to be an idiot, you're not likely going to be an idiot. But informal rules and sanctions can only go so far. Over time, especially in larger societies, primitive forms of police were given iotas of power to enforce rules and expectations. There were prefects in ancient China, sort of sheriffs before the time of sheriffs. These folks would be appointed by local magistrates and would oversee the application of law. Local yokels could report offenses to the prefectural office, after which the prefect would follow up. They kind of acted as proto-detectives of sorts, investigating crimes and doling out punishments. They were nowhere near as organized and institutionalized as modern police, though. In ancient Egypt, they were sometimes officers armed with wooden sticks who were tasked with guarding public places. Temples, parks, and markets would be patrolled by these switch-wielding fellows. Often they would apprehend criminals who were disturbing the public peace. An interesting fact about these particular officers is that sometimes they had trained dogs and monkeys who would assist in their duties. Only larger cities would receive protection from people like this. Rural communities would appeal to their village elders for the application of justice. However, a constable might come through from time to time to enforce state laws. In ancient Greece, publicly owned slaves would be used by magistrates as police. These not-so-free men would largely be deployed for crowd control, handling prisoners, and making arrests. However, other duties like investigating crimes were still left to the common citizen. The Roman Empire got a little closer to our idea of modern police. Security was largely provided by the army, but over time, local watchmen were hired to provide a little extra security. Under Augustus, the capital had almost 1 million inhabitants, meaning that they had to divide their efforts a little bit. 14 wards were created, and bands of vigiles were called in to act as firemen and watchmen. They would often round up escaped slaves and guard different public places. So already we've seen some alternatives to police. They all have the idea of maintaining law and order in common with some slightly different approaches. Of course, in ancient societies there were less people and populations were less concentrated, but a lot of the law enforcement was done by citizens interested in keeping the peace. And if people with economic and political power wanted to protect something for their own good, they would employ their own security. So looking far back, our initial answer is that if the police never existed, other people would step up in their communities. In fact, it's my belief that people are less likely to commit crimes if they're surrounded by familiar faces. So we've addressed some surface level ancient policing. But what about the inception of the modern police? Like we already discussed, citizens were relied upon for maintaining law and order for centuries. Constables and justices were volunteer positions, and sometimes sheriffs, or shire reeves, were employed full-time to oversee law enforcement. This worked well for quite a while, especially in rural communities. However, as populations grew rapidly in the 18th and 19th centuries, it seemed that major cities needed some sort of permanent and professional law enforcement backed by the government. With the study of criminology expanding around this time too, a lot of different ideas on how to regulate people and their activities in city centers were floating around. Enter Sir Robert Peel, father of modern policing. He looked at calls to create a centralized police to protect citizens and maintain order, and then founded the Metropolitan Police Services in London. At first, people were opposed to this idea. Let me know if this sounds familiar. Folks thought that a centralized police force would essentially act as another arm of the military and that they would be controlled by an occupying force. That's funny. In order to soothe some of the fiery opposition, Peel came up with some rules and guidelines for being a good police officer, known as the Peelian Principles. They boiled down to something a little like this. Prevent crime, maintain order, make sure the public can trust you, you're looking to achieve voluntary compliance with the law. Be impartial. Force and physical control are a last resort. Remember that police too are members of the public, and that the true measure of effectiveness isn't arrest numbers or amount of actions taken, but instead the absence of criminal conduct and violations of the law. Those were some lofty aspirations. Unfortunately, people are often poor at achieving their goals. Now, if Sir Robert Peel never came up with this fun idea, the police as we know them might not have existed. However, many other folks were turning similar ideas over in their heads, so some sort of similar idea would have come forth. Criminology was rapidly evolving, and many legal philosophers, including Jeremy Bentham, were working towards ideas of crime-stopping institutions. Wouldn't it be nice if they came up with some community-based preventative measures instead of largely punitive ones? And while British police weren't originally armed, when the idea made it to the States, things were done a little differently. A large problem with modern police is their almost indiscriminate use of violence when situations are anything other than routine. While some folks are calling for reform and more training for things like de-escalation, others point to the police in the States being born from violence. Back in 1841, there was a group of early law enforcers known as the Texas Rangers, and no, they did not just play baseball. In fact, they're considered the first state police organization. These men, under the guise of law enforcement, slaughtered Native Americans and stole their territory in order to expand the frontier westward. We can also look to slave patrols, government-backed groups of folks tasked with bringing escaped slaves back to captivity. These can also be seen as early iterations of police. They were just enforcing the law, you see. And to really make a connection between the past and present, we can look back to riot control in major cities during the Industrial Revolution. When exploited workers rioted against their unfair working conditions, they were brought down by police, legally authorized to use force to maintain order. The order they were maintaining, of course, was the bourgeois ability to profit while keeping their workers in factories as opposed to on the streets striking. The use of police to do this gave people the idea that the order was maintained under rule of law, not for benefit of those with power. Looking at these early policing examples, it becomes clear that they were largely used to control communities through use of force. So following up on that, if police never existed, we can only assume that indigenous Americans would have kept more of their land, slaves would have been freed a little sooner, and workers' rights would have been better respected. But again, it's also likely some alternative would have been put in place to enforce the will of those in power. Nowadays, it seems that a lot of lives might have been saved if police never existed. Folks put into dangerous chokeholds, people caught in the crossfire, individuals falsely detained through use of force. Communities of Black and Indigenous people of color would have been less fragmented and disadvantaged. And you might be thinking, what about murderers, rapists, bank robbers? What would we do about them without police? And if police never existed? It's hard to say. One might hope that all our money that went into outfitting police departments with uniforms and weapons and vehicles would have instead gone into community projects that empowered people and made it so that they didn't have to commit crimes. But now, with the idea of police abolition gaining traction, one can do their best to ensure that we strategically reallocate police resources to other important areas. Crime doesn't just happen because nobody's there to enforce the law, it happens when people can't meet their needs through other means. Plus, a lot of crime happens because certain behavior is criminalized. If we can generate more jobs, housing, education, and community support, crime will drop. This can be achieved through the gradual abolition of police institutions. It wouldn't just be taking down every police station and letting people run wild. Resources, funding, and responsibility would need to be strategically reallocated away from police. For too long, the police have been expected to do jobs that they aren't equipped to deal with. Mental health crises should be dealt with by mental health professionals, not police. Failing schools should be dealt with through increased funding and support, not by adding police to the mix. If resources are moved towards community-based models of safety, support, and prevention, the police won't be needed and violent reactions will fall. So to give one more final answer to today's titular question, if the police never existed, people would have to change their views on what safety means and how it can be achieved. There would be no organization tasked with filling lovely, overstuffed prisons. People addicted to drugs could access the help they need instead of being arrested. Money and resources could be used elsewhere. Families would likely be more whole with less fathers being imprisoned. It's very possible, though, that the military would also play a different role at home. And of course, we'd have to live in a world without police procedurals and buddy cop movies. That last one's tough, I know. And that's all we've got for today. This is an important topic, and I implore you to research it further. Find community organizations near you that need support and help them in whatever way you can. Give your support to those inordinately affected by the current state of law enforcement, namely Black and Indigenous people of color. Black Lives Matter. Keep asking questions. The world doesn't just return to normal at this point. And that's all the time we have for today. Before I disappear, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more hypothetical parentheticals. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.